welcome everybody. This is a Halloween Skeptics in the Pub online special. The title that we were given was I Ain't Afraid of No Ghosts, which is quite ironic because as a kid I was absolutely terrified of ghosts, but we won't go there. Now, before I introduce tonight's very special guest, I just want to say a few words about what skepticism is about and what Skeptics in the Pub is about. Skeptics basically are people who like to see evidence before making their mind up about a claim. I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. Skeptics in the Pub started in the last century. In 1999, Scott Campbell held the first meeting in London. And the format then was basically that someone would be invited to come and give a talk, there'd be a Q&A, and there'd be a kind of general social. And that's really the format as it has stayed. The idea caught on. There were other branches that opened up across the UK and beyond. And of course, up until quite recently, lots of people would have been going out and seeing these events live, face-to-face, so to speak. Of course, the pandemic's put a stop to that. But fortunately, Skeptics in the Pub online mean that you will get your regular fix of skepticism. So if this is your first time, then welcome. If this is not your first time, then welcome back. A couple of other things I want to mention before I introduce our special guest. I want to give a plug to the next talk in this series, which is on Thursday, the 5th of November. And that's the one and only Tim Harford from Radio 4's More or Less programme. Fantastic programme if you want to kind of try and really understand all the baffling statistics that have been thrown around, particularly around COVID and so on. The title of Tim's talk is How to Make the World Add Up, 10 Rules for Thinking Differently About Numbers. The other important thing to mention is that this event is a fundraiser for the charity, the Centre for Effective Altruism. Now, as I said before, skeptics are people who like to make decisions on the basis of the best available evidence, and this is just 100% in line with that charity's work. The charity, just to quote, the Centre for Effective Altruism uses evidence and careful analysis to find how to help others as much as possible. Their fund managers use the best evidence available to identify organisations and projects with the highest expected impact. All donations from tonight's event will be split among the 4 effective altruism funds. That's global health and development, animal welfare, long-term future, and effective altruism infrastructure. So please do give generously. You can go to the link, which is at sitp.online/charity. Okay. Hello, are we back? I hope so. All right, everyone. I've just been going through a really, really, really long list of all Richard's achievements, but you missed it. So, sorry. So anyway, without further ado, let me introduce Richard, one of my favourite people. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Professor Richard Wiseman. Hello, Richard.
Hello. How are you? How are you, Chris?
Very well, thank you, mate.
I was trying to think the first time we met. I'm telling you how we go back a long, long way in skepticism and as friends as well. The first joint talk we gave, I can remember we were heckled by Charles Darwin. That's how far we go back.
Yeah, it was a good heckle, though. It was good.
It was very good, very good. Yes, we're going to be talking about ghosts this evening. I've done many Skeptics in the Pub over the years, but this is the first virtual one. I've been talking about ghosts and how they don't exist. I've never seen any evidence for a ghost at all. We should make that absolutely clear as we start off. That although it's Halloween, absolutely nothing that I've ever seen would convince me that they actually exist. And all I would ask, if they do exist, is just, send any kind of sign. That's sort of basically what I ask for. And I never had anything over the years.
I mean, there are people out there, as you know, Richard, who would say that because of your skepticism, you wouldn't notice the evidence even if it was right there where you were.
What do they know? Where is the proof of that? That's all I ask for. Any kind of proof that I'd miss an obvious sign. Anyway, here we are. Congratulations on your retirement.
Yes, 350 years at Goldsmiths, and I have retired. I am an ex-professor. I'm an emeritus professor. So get me. Yeah.
Very good. Right. What's the green thing over your shoulder?
Green thing over my shoulder. Oh, can you see the green thing over my shoulder?
Oh, perhaps people can't.
About there?
Yeah.
Yeah. That is like, it's a big roll of kind of stuff that you wrap. I mean, my wife does pottery.
Yes.
So wrapping the pottery in if you're posting it somewhere.
Oh, lovely.
Carrying it around. So it's just like bubble wrap.
Oh.
Wrap. Yeah.
Lovely.
I hadn't realised it was in shot.
It might not be for most people, but another mystery solved. I mean, that's what we're going to...
Just what you do, isn't it, Richard?
Exactly. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Eat your heart out, Scooby-Doo, I say. Right. No, being serious though, folks. I mean, skepticism these days, skeptics in the pub, cover a very, very wide range. But both you and I kind of started with the stuff that was there in the early days, which was the paranormal.
Yes.
So it's only appropriate that tonight we stick to talking about ghosts. Okay.
About ghosts. I went, this is quite a long time ago now, I went back to my parents' house. This is obviously before lockdown. And I was looking at the books that I used to read when I was a kid, like 7 or 8. And it was hilarious. I was skeptical even then. I was a skeptic, age 7. I wasn't even certain I was 7. I thought I might be 9. And I'm going through this stuff, and it's like Loch Ness Monster, explained. UFOs, explained. Ghosts, the truth. So, yeah, it goes back a long way. But I think you were a believer, though, weren't you, early on?
Yeah, probably even by then, because I'm a lot older than you, Richard.
Oh.
But as a kid, I mean, when I was that age, I was absolutely terrified of ghosts. I was terrified of the dark, It's kind of ironic that now, I mean, these days I've done like TV programs where I'm sitting in supposedly haunted locations with a night camera, and it's about as exciting as watching paint dry, But I'm not saying I could never be scared in the appropriate circumstances. I'm sure I could, but compared to then, where just being on my own in the dark was enough to give me the heebie-jeebies, and it was thinking about ghosties and stuff.
Yes.
It's kind of strange.
I think the dark is very scary. We've done loads of fake seances, and in fact, it's a bit sad. This is the first Halloween we haven't done a live kind of seance, and just when you blow out that final candle, and everyone goes into absolute pitch darkness, and we're not used to that nowadays. You think you're in a dark room, but actually there's a crack in the window blind or something. But when you're in absolute darkness, it's a bit scary because you're so vulnerable. Yeah. So it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me that as a young Chris French was there, quaking in his little boots.
In my little boots, I was. And I mean, I can even remember kind of, as a teenager, like the books like, the film The Exorcist scared me witless. The Amityville Horror, said on the cover it was true, so I believed it. I was naive. Yeah, I was looking compared to
Explained. That was the book I had.
Yeah,
The Exorcist, the truth.
Okay, let's talk about. I mean, okay, what are the conditions under which people tend to have ghostly experiences?
Well, we should say that first of all, ghostly experiences aren't quite what you often think. So, although earlier on I'm being reliably informed, there may have been a ghostly figure walking behind me.
I definitely saw something. I'm not. It was just a trick.
I saw nothing. And I was here. I mean, I would have noticed that. So you think, it's going to be, the woman in white or the ghostly figure. Actually, it's not. Most people's ghostly experiences is, or some of them are visual, and when they are visual, they're of a solid figure. And you only realise that solid figure is a ghost when it does something impossible, like walk through a wall, or that person is no longer with us. But most ghostly experiences are just odd anomalies. So there might be an odd smell, particularly if I'm in the room. It might be a sort of breeze again.
People blame the dog.
I know.
Blame the ghost.
I don't have that. That's another book I had, Dogs Explained. So there's no magic in my childhood. So an odd smell, an odd breeze, just a feeling of being watched. Is often it. So it's not just that classic sort of ghostly apparition thing that you see in films. The experiences are something quite different. And people do see them all over the place. Yeah, go on.
Where do you think that idea of ghosts that you can see through came from? I mean, I kind of assume it possibly came when people invented cameras. The first time you could have double exposures, but before that, it would have been probably an idea that wouldn't have occurred to people. That I've never actually looked back historically to see if that's where it happened, but I mean, that's our traditional way of thinking about it now.
And I don't know. That's probably certainly a British tradition. It may be a Western tradition as well. The answer is I don't know either. So somebody will know. If anyone's watching this and know, then don't text in a question. Text in the answer. That'd be more helpful. So people have unusual experiences. They tend to have them in places which have a reputation for being haunted. And we should separate out, first of all, ghosts, which are one-off experiences. You wake up and you see a ghost at the end of the bed or whatever. And haunted places, which is where people over time reliably have these experiences, often in the same place in that building. And so that place gets a reputation for being haunted. And the psychology and the science of those two things are somewhat different.
Right. And so what is it about certain places then? How do they end up getting that reputation in the first place? I imagine that once you've got the reputation, then people are going in kind of primed, and that's going to have psychological effects. But what leads it to happen in the first place?
Well, I think this comes down to the nub of it. We've got to the nub of it very surprisingly early.
We'll back off soon.
Right. Another 2 minutes. We will explain the whole of ghosts. I think it comes down to why do we see ghosts? What work are they doing, as social psychologists would say? And for some people, if you've got something that's happened where something bad has happened to somebody, and you think, well, it should be a just world, and this person was killed in a horrible way, and it wasn't their fault, and they were innocent, and so on, then they get the opportunity to come back and haunt us. And to play on our guilt and to take revenge. And that becomes a just world, as it were. So often these places are associated with stories of death, and the death is unfair in some way. So when we looked at the haunting at Hampton Court, for example, you have the beheading there. And this was, it was a terrible death, and there's a chance that ghost to come back and haunt the king and so on. So that's certainly one part of it. The other part is what I've referred to as my Scooby-Doo theory of ghosts, which is that often on Scooby-Doo, for those of you who remember it, I can remember as a child had a book, Scooby-Doo Explained. Is that somebody would fake a ghost in order to keep people away from a building because they were doing some smuggling racket or something. And I think to some extent, ghosts are created by us to keep us away from places where we would be vulnerable. So if you go into a dark room and it's quite large, which means that somebody could get to you, there could be a predator hiding, or a very small room, which means if you're attacked, you haven't got very far you haven't got the opportunity to run away. The ghosts we're creating in our mind are keeping us out of those spaces. They're keeping us safe. And it's a little bit like Scooby-Doo episodes. So therefore, you can see under both of those circumstances that certain places would develop reputations.
Right. I mean, whenever I'm kind of asked about the psychology of ghosts, etc., I would say that the two most important psychological factors, and I think your work kind of backs this up, would be context. Or he kind of talked about, if you know that a place is supposed to be haunted, it changes how you feel when you're walking around in it, and also prior belief. Do you already believe in ghosts? And I mean, I think your work would support both of the idea that both of those have been really important factors.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've been in a bit like you with these TV shows where you get carted around a lot of sort of weird haunted places. There was one place, I now can't remember where it was. It's not a great story in that sense. But I walked, it was a house, and they said, go around the house and tell us which room you think is haunted. And I walked around the house and it all felt very normal. Then I got to one particular room and it was just weird. It was just weird. The proportions were just wrong, and it was like looking through at a stage effect called cracked oil, which they use on stage so you can't tell the distance on. It was like that. It was the weirdest experience, and there's something in the quality of that room, I think, that makes people a bit weird. Right. So did you have that when you were wandering around weird places?
again, very, very rarely.
Yeah.
I can't think. I mean, one of the things again with the kind of the programs that I was in. I mean, inevitably you'd be filming overnight, and sometimes you were really, really tired. But I can't remember on one particular occasion, kind of standing in one room and just feeling kind of dizzy and lightheaded. Now, it may well have been nothing more than tiredness, but I'd imagine if I was a believer, I might have had a different interpretation of what was on there. It's the.
And we should say these things build. So once you're in a scary space, you become hypervigilant. And now any sort of crack of the sound of footsteps, or you start to hear your own physiology, your heart beating or whatever, and you interpret it within that context.
Right.
And so, some lovely work by Jim Horan, where he took groups of people around the same cinema, told one it was haunted and the other it was just being renovated, and you got all the weird experiences on the haunted group. Yeah. And those experiences were being experienced by the other group as well, in terms of creaky staircases and so on, but they weren't interpreting them as ghostly. So I think context really matters. The scariest thing, when we used to do the seances, you're in pitch darkness, absolute pitch darkness. And as a performer, you get very attuned to every sound in that room. And so in a fake seance, a bit like a real seance, you ask everyone to hold hands. And the reason for that is you've just controlled 15 people around the table. And what you do not want is anyone standing up and clowning around in pitch darkness. It's really dangerous, and you just don't want it. So I've done hundreds of these. And on one of them, I'm doing the seance thing. I've done the spiel. We're halfway through the seance. And I hear a noise off to the side about 2 meters away from the group. And that's terrifying because it means that someone stood up.
Yeah.
So you do what you're trained to do, and it's in all the books, which is you go around the group and you say, everyone, I want you to squeeze the hand to the person on your left and say your name into the darkness. And that tells you where the missing person is. So you go straight into that. We whip around the group. Everyone's there.
Ooh.
So I'm thinking, right, this is now scary. So you can hear my voice. I'm kind of going, as a kid, I'd read seances explained, but this hadn't come up in any of the chapters. So I cut the whole thing short. And is the thing. I turn on the lights. I go over there. It's rats. We're performing in a historic venue, and rats have got in. And that is the scariest I've ever been. I was terrified.
Now, I know that my wife is probably watching this, and she would find rats far scarier than any ghost. That would totally freak her out.
They're quite sweet rats. They're quite nice. We went for a nice cup of tea afterwards. We talked about the experience with them. They were fine.
I mean, again, another thing that's kind of I've noticed is that once people get the idea that maybe their own house is haunted, then even very mundane things are interpreted within that context. So you can't find your keys in the morning, it's because the ghost has moved them, rather than I've just forgotten where I put them. Yeah. And so it can be something that triggers that belief. Usually, it might be, objects appear to be moving and you can't think of an explanation, or there are weird sounds, or maybe an episode of sleep paralysis, that something leads the person to have that belief in the first place. And then once it's taken hold, an awful lot more is interpreted within that context.
Yeah, it kicks off a sort of positive belief system, which then reinforces itself. And we should say, although it's Halloween and we're going to get all a bit scary and so on, if you believe in ghosts and you're in a haunted house, and particularly if it's your own house and you can't escape that, that's all a little bit scary.
Yeah.
And so it's, for some people it's terrifying. Now, you mentioned sleep paralysis there. Should we talk about, you know far more about sleep paralysis than me. What is this thing of use? As a kid, the one book I didn't have was Sleep Paralysis Explained. So
it'll be in the post to you tomorrow, Richard. Sleep paralysis is one of my favorite topics. In its most basic form, lots of people will have had it. The estimates vary enormously, but in its most basic form, it occurs between sleep and wakefulness, and it's a temporary period of paralysis. So you realize you can't move. And that obviously is a little bit disconcerting, but it usually just lasts a few seconds and you snap out of it. But for some people, you get associated symptoms, and they typically would be a very, very strong sense of presence. Even if you can't see anything or hear anything, you know there is something there in the darkness. And it doesn't mean you any good at all. But you may get visual or auditory or tactile hallucinations. So you might kind of see lights moving around the room or dark shadows, monstrous figures, demonic forms, all kinds of stuff. You might hear voices or footsteps or mechanical sounds. In terms of the kind of tactile stuff, you might feel as if you might feel someone breathing on the back of your neck. And bear in mind, you can't move. You're aware that you're in your bedroom. You're aware you're lying there in bed, but you can't move. I get sent lots and lots of first-hand accounts of this stuff, and they really are creepy. It's really scary stuff, because even though it's not real, and typically the person who's sending me their account knows it's not real, they've identified it as sleep paralysis, but it's still terrifying to know that's what that person was experiencing at the time. Again, like anything else, it doesn't explain all claims of ghostly nighttime visitors, but a hell of a lot of them it does. If you ask people, a lot of the time you say, well, do you think you could move at the time? And people say, well, I didn't even try. I was just so terrified. I wasn't moving, But, you very often find there are experience. I've experienced it in its kind of milder forms. I've never had the full whistles and bells version, I'm pleased to say, but I have experienced it in its milder form. And I say the estimates vary, but it seems that there was a big meta-analysis by a friend of mine, Brian Sharpless, in the States, and overall it seemed like amongst the general population it was about 8% who reported they'd experienced it at least once. But there were two groups that showed rates of about 30%, and that was psychiatric patients and students. And it makes sense, because if you've got the underlying predisposition, anything that disrupts your sleep cycle makes it more likely to actually manifest. And so there are two groups with very, very disrupted sleep patterns.
I read somewhere, if it does happen to you, that if you just try and wiggle your toes, that's enough to break the paralysis. You can try and wiggle somebody else's toes, but that's quite hard.
You say that as if, just wiggle your toes. That's the thing. It takes an enormous effort of will. You really have to summon your strength. And people feel like they have difficulty breathing. There's pressure on the chest, it feels like. They feel as if someone's suffocating them, and they feel that they're going to die. It is absolutely very, very scary.
I've never had that. I used to, a few years ago, I had a lot of night terrors, which are very similar in the sense you attribute them to a ghost. And so you open your eyes, you sit up, you often scream, and you see this often demonic figure or sort of huge spider or whatever, and you're absolutely, as you say, convinced that it's going to do you no good at all. And you scream, and if you're sleeping next to somebody, it wakes that person up. They're genuinely awake. You are actually still in stage 4 sleep, so you can go straight back to sleep, but now they're wide awake for quite a long time. So I always think it's more terrible for them than it is for the person experiencing it. But I had that many, many times.
And can you remember the experience the next day, do you?
No.
I was under the impression that with night terrors, people often didn't remember the experience the next day, even though their partner did.
Yeah, so this is the thing. So if your partner says to you, oh, anything odd happened last night? Then you go, oh, yeah, I remember now. But when I used to live in London, there was a time I woke up and I thought, boy, what a dream that was. I dreamt there was some demonic animals trying to get into this room. Oh, dear. But I looked over at the door and there was a chair I'd moved across, like a dining chair. I had wedged it so hard under the door, I'd almost broken its back legs off. And I'd been asleep, but I'd done the whole thing. Yeah. So,
and I kind of often think of night terrors and sleep paralysis as being kind of flip sides of each other, because with sleep paralysis, you definitely remember it and you can't move. With night terrors, you can move and often end up trying to climb up the curtains to get away from whatever it is that you think is there, and often don't remember it the next morning. So, there are differences, even though the other thing is that, we know that sleep paralysis happens during REM stage sleep, whereas, as you say, night terrors, it's kind of stage 4 sleep. But again,
do not touch the person. If your person you're sleeping next to sits up like that and screams, do not touch them, or indeed move, because they will become convinced. Take it from me, they will become convinced you are that attacking entity. So the best thing to do is just stay there and just quietly say their name if you want to bring them back into the thing. But do not move because yeah, you are not in control of yourself, my lord, when those things happen. So anyway, we've gone off go. So yes, I did.
Just a more quick comment, Richard, because again, that's kind of just for anybody who's watching who has a partner that suffers from sleep paralysis. People who suffer from sleep paralysis are often trying to scream at the top of their lungs, and no noise is coming out, except maybe for a little kind of. Now, sometimes their partner recognizes that noise. Can I do that again?
Yeah, well, that's good. Oh,
that was nice, isn't it? But your partner can sometimes recognize, oh my gosh, they're having sleep paralysis, and you should wake them up then. Just shake them awake, and that'll be fine. It'll break the spell, and they won't, it won't have any traumatic consequences. So again, opposite advice for how partners should deal with it if they realise the person in bed next to them is going through it. Yeah. Again, I'm getting back to this thing about sometimes people not, because you can't think of an explanation for some noise or some movement or something that's happening in the house. People will often think, well, maybe it's a ghost, whereas obviously, in fact, just because you can't think of an explanation doesn't mean necessarily there isn't one. And you and I will both be familiar with lots of cases where some really obscure, unexpected explanations are actually the correct ones. And one of my favourites recently was, I don't know if you saw the story in the paper probably about 18 months ago, of a guy who had a little tool shed and he used a little workshop in his garden. He used to work all day, and he'd a bit messy. He'd leave all his stuff out, and he'd lock up, go to bed, come back the next day, go in, and everything had been put back in his toolbox, and he couldn't figure out what it was. There's a video of this on YouTube. Him and his mate set up a camera, and it was a little mouse. This little mouse coming in and putting all this stuff back in the box. I mean, it's great to show during talks because people just sit there going, But, if a skeptic had put that forward as an explanation, you'd have thought, oh, yeah, you're really clutching at straws now. But that is what it was,
Well, I'm not an expert on mice, but if you've got a hammer, I wouldn't have thought a mouse could pick that up.
No, it's the little bits of wire and so on, all the little bits and bobs that were on the desk. Like, picking up this monkey wrench, and he had a team of rats to do that for him.
That's what was in my head. I thought it was like, a vice. They just push that over one side, a couple of hammers, and a pair of pliers. So I got started in this ghostly business when I got a call from Hampton Court Palace. And they've got the haunted corridor, which ghosts allegedly wandered up and down. That's the name of it. And they wanted someone to go and investigate. And I hadn't done much ghost stuff, actually. I hadn't done any ghost stuff at that point. But I assembled a sort of crack team of people that were free that weekend. And
they're really crack.
Oh, yeah. And we went
very
down,
crack.
And we did this thing where we took groups of people around the haunted corridor. But before that, what I'd underestimated is how big a news story this was going to be, because the first time anything had been done in a royal palace. And so it really played big overseas because it was like British aristocracy and ghosts and all this stuff. And I hadn't seen that coming. So I get down there and we have a press conference. And so I sit at this press conference, and it's going to be beamed live to various places across the world. That's sort of how big this thing had become. And I sit down, we just sort of sort out all the shots. And then I say, it's quite a long drive, so I'm just going to step outside for 10 minutes, and then I'll come back and we can start. And I swear this story is true, all right? This story is true. I go outside. This is the only time in my life this has ever happened to me. A car goes past with some kids in, and teenagers or something, and one of them throws an egg, and the egg hits me and goes all down my jacket. And and I thought I'd wiped it off, but I sort of hadn't, and it was being broadcast live, so I had to go. So I go back in, and I've got slime all down the thing. And so
slime.
Yes, like the ghost slimed me. It was unbelievable timing. It's the only time I've been egged which is itself is quite remarkable. So we did that thing. Yeah. And what we found out was that there were parts of the haunted corridor which have got hidden panels in, that have been hidden away over the years, and that's causing weird drafts, and those drafts people were interpreting as ghosts. We did some work on electromagnetic fields, and didn't really find very much of a relationship there. And this was related to Persinger's work, which we might want to talk about in a moment. But from there, I then came up to Edinburgh, and we did a similar experiment, the Edinburgh Vaults, where we put individuals into vaults, asked them if they had weird experiences. And the vaults that had a history of being haunted were the ones where people had weird experiences, even though they didn't know the reputation of those.
That's really interesting, which does suggest that there are certain environmental factors that do lead people to feel.
Yeah, or they're haunted is the other possibility.
They're haunted.
Yeah, and so in there, it was the very large vaults where I think you walked in and felt vulnerable, or the very small ones where you thought if there is a tiger over in that side, then I'm not going to stand much of a chance. And those are the things which seem to me to be obvious. So we did that. So we also did some work with Vic Tandy up here as well with the infrasound that we should talk about in a second. And that was my introduction to kind of ghost hunting-y stuff. Yeah.
I mean, just to kind of for anybody that's not familiar with these ideas, because again, we did a project on this. As you know, we did a study of this. The idea from Michael Persinger, who sadly passed away recently, didn't he? Which is a shame. But the idea was that unusual patterns of electromagnetic activity in the environment could affect certain susceptible individuals and produce unusual patterns of firing in the temporal lobes, and that would be experienced as some kind of paranormal phenomenon, maybe an apparition or sense of presence or whatever else it may be. And Vic Tandy put forward a similar idea with respect to environmental infrasound. That's sound energy below the audible frequency range, typically about 19 hertz. And I mean, it's interesting the way those ideas have kind of caught on within the paranormal community. They're almost kind of taken as facts, which I think they are far from, personally. I mean, they're intriguing ideas. And as you'll be aware, a few years back, I did a study in collaboration with Usman Hack and various other people where we thought, well, if there's anything in these ideas, wouldn't it be fun to build an artificial haunted room where we just get people to go in and we play around with electromagnetic fields and infrasound and so on. Obviously all safe, physically safe, but for ethical reasons, we had to say to people before they went in, you may be exposed to infrasound, you may be exposed to unusual patterns of electromagnetic activity. You may get both, you may get neither. You won't know consciously, you won't know which condition you're in. But as a result, you may have some anomalous experiences. And I'm talking about the kind of thing you were talking about, a chill, a sense of presence, dizziness, whatever else it may be. And we found that quite a sizable minority of people did indeed report those kinds of sensations. But when we analysed the results, it didn't matter what condition they were in. It didn't matter whether the infrasound was on or off. It didn't matter whether the electromagnetic field was on or off. What the number of weird experiences they reported did correlate with was their scores on a questionnaire which Persinger used to use, the temporal lobe signs inventory. He would use this as a way of trying to identify people with these labile temporal lobes, but that is also known to correlate with, wait for it, suggestibility. So in other words, the parsimonious explanation is that if you say to suggestible people, go in there, you might have a weird experience. Some of them do. So, I mean, it would have been much more exciting and interesting to get results related to infrasound or electromagnetic fields, but we didn't. All that shows is that the setup we had did not produce those effects. I don't think it kind of is a killer blow for either idea, but I also don't think there's the evidence in support of the ideas is that strong either.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I wouldn't put those two theories quite side by side, in the sense of I'm far more skeptical about Persinger's theory, because the brain is pretty well insulated against electromagnetic fields, and the ones he's talking about are very, very weak. Vic's one, and again, unfortunately, Vic is no longer with us, of course.
Lovely man.
Lovely man. And his idea, at least, is, I don't know if you can hear that, there's Halloween activity outside my window. I hope it's that, or they're actually genuine ghosts trying to get in. Watch it on Twitch like the rest of them. So Vic's one is much more plausible about infrasound, that absolutely can affect people at certain levels, and particularly if you get standing waves set up in a room. So we did an experiment, which was a concert at the South Bank with Sarah Anglis and Jenia, the pianist, and Kieran O'Keefe, psychologist. And that's where we pumped in infrasound to certain parts of a concert and asked people if they had weird experiences. And there we did find a relationship with it. But this is the thing. When we were trying that out, some people could hear the infrasound, even though it's supposed to be below auditory levels. And also, I can remember when it was put on, sometimes the sheet of paper that people were holding started to quiver.
Which is quite spooky.
I mean, the other thing we should say about infrasound, which is why Vic was interested as a ghostly activity, is that it makes candles flicker. His is far from a crazy theory. I think under certain circumstances it probably holds some water.
I know Jason Braithwaite has actually kind of critiqued it probably as thoroughly as it could be. But again, as I say, I mean, we weren't kind of concluding that therefore, showed these ideas had no merit. We just didn't have any evidence to support them. So, a few other things that we were gonna have a chat about. We've done sleep paralysis. Photos. This is another thing. I remember you and I did a two-hander. I think it was in Brighton, was it? About photos of paranormal.
Yes.
Happy day.
I remember. We had a very tricky question from William James. Yeah, that's how far that goes.
Yeah. Because he was, what is this photography thing of which you speak?
Exactly. That's right. How does it relate to consciousness? I said, William, let it go, I said.
One of the things about photography is that, basically the kind of whole history of psychical research, as it used to be called, and parapsychology as it is now, is the histories have been intertwined. From the moment that photography was invented, people started taking spirit photographs. And you kind of come up to date, and there's still people finding ghosts in their images, or again, the whole history of technology, and particularly recording technology, because people want hard evidence that Again, one of the things that struck me about the taking part in this Haunted Homes TV series, because nobody involved actually would fake anything, it didn't really make for great TV.
Problem.
It's always in people's heads. People would be genuinely frightened and reporting seeing stuff, but it was never recorded. I mean, there was one exception to that, which I think I've mentioned to you before, but we did a program in a radio station, Radio Beacon in the Midlands, where amongst other things, people had reported sometimes hearing children's voices singing "Ring a Ring a Roses," and sometimes hearing a ghostly sneeze. And a long story short, they actually recorded. This is the only time we had any objective evidence. They recorded on the EVP recorders sound. And I was kind of interviewed, kind of making a big deal of this, kind of, what do you make of this then, you smart-ass skeptic? They didn't use those words, but that's what they meant. And I'm kind of saying, well, it does sound like a sneeze, but it could be 101 other things, The second night we were there, I kind of popped into the loo before we started recording on the landing where this had been recorded. And as I came out, our paranormal investigator, the guy who brought all this electronic kit and wizardry with him, very, very disgruntled look on his face, and he's pointing at the wall. And I looked to where he's pointing, and there it was. an automatic air freshener. And sure enough, we hung around for a couple of minutes and that was the noise we heard. Now, we did an interview to camera the next day to explain that we knew what the sneeze sound was. It wasn't a ghost. Unfortunately, when they edited the program, they didn't have enough time to squeeze in our explanation. They made a big deal about the sneeze, but nothing about the explanation.
It would have been great if it wasn't an automatic one. It was being operated by a mouse. And that was the same mouse that had also been responsible for the shed ghost.
I think this is my mouse theory of ghosts. I think all ghosts, without exception, can be explained by mice.
Yes. So, yes, we did Science of Ghosts, which was with the Edinburgh Science Festival. It's myself, Caroline Watt, and Gordon Rutter did that. We asked people to send in their ghostly photos. I've got some of them to show folks. So I'm hoping that people can see it. If I click on this screen here, I don't know whether people can see that. Have we got any way of telling me if people can see that?
I can't see that. I can see it. Okay.
But you can't see it, Chris. Is that correct?
So you can make up any old rubbish now, Richard, and I'll believe you.
Okay. This is one of Chris, totally naked. I don't know how that got in there.
And it might be Halloween, but we don't want to frighten people that much.
No, that's right. And before you ask, that's not a mouse. So this is an orbs photo, Chris, that we're looking at. So this is very, very common. I think this one is from the Edinburgh Vaults. And you can see these little orby bits over it. It convinces a lot of people about ghostly activity. And that's basically dust in the air, and it's reflecting off the flash and into the camera. But orb photos, really common. I think we had about 500 photos submitted, and I would think 200 of them were orb ones.
Yeah.
Next one that we're looking at is looks like this. And that's a strange patterning of an oddly sort of like a kind of honeycomb patterning of a ghost. And that's the camera strap that's folded in front of the camera. So these are all ones we could explain. You mentioned double images earlier on, Chris, and this is one, I think, from the top of Edinburgh Castle, which has got a lovely double image in there. Looks like a spirit off to the far right. Next one is sort of movement of cigarette ends. The camera's moved down, and you get this kind of odd patterning as the cigarette sort of continues to burn at night, as it were. The next one, not quite certain where it is. Let me just see what we've got on it. It's a figure standing at the end of a pier-like structure, and it's very, very odd. It looks like an astronaut, I guess. And we put this up on the website and said, can anyone explain it? And someone could, because they recognized where it was. And when you go to that place, then you realize there is an odd structure at the end of that pier, which from a distance looks like an astronaut. Right. So it's great. This is what was great about doing this project, is we could stick these things out and you have people all over the globe who go, hold on a second, I recognize that place or whatever. The next one, if anyone's ever seen me give a ghost talk, will recognise it's two kids in the park, and we've covered up their faces because it's not about the kids. But hopefully in the river behind them, you can see the demonic face staring at the children. And so this is where we wrote back to the parents and we said, your children must be slaughtered. And how were we to know they had no sense of humour? That's all no, we didn't do that at all. So this gets us onto something which both of us have spoken about, which is pareidolia. And basically what you're looking at there are rocks and leaves reflected in the water. And I think whenever you present anything that looks like a face to humans, because we'd rather see a face that isn't there than miss one that is, we're intensely sort of social animals, then we start seeing faces all over the place. So you can show that. I've got a little bag here with a zip and two buttons on it that looks like a face. This is what I call emotional baggage. There's my little joke there, terrible little joke. The next one, I appreciate, Chris, you can't see it. It's this photo, and it's very, very curious. It's some women standing in a room, and between the legs of two of the women is a tiny little face. a little sort of ghostly face. I've blown it up large and put it onto the screen there. What is astonishing about this shot is none of those women have ever come forward. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 women in that shot, and it's gone all around the world, and never ever come forward to say, yes, we were there at that time. And we put it on the blog, and people didn't see it. And the next one is Tantallon Castle, which we investigated with the Edinburgh Skeptics. This is a castle in East Lothian, and they had a picture of an old woman. They sort of took a picture, and they said that part of the castle wasn't really accessible to the public, and you couldn't get a shot quite like that. So we went up there, and I played the role of the old woman, and you can sort of see that I can get a very, very similar sort of shot. That's me on the right there. So, yeah, we investigated a lot of these. I can go back now, I think, to Skypey stuff over here. Get you back on, Chris. We investigated a lot of these. And we had about 1 million hits on the site. I think about 500 photos sent in. Unfortunately, no evidence of ghostly activity, but kind of fascinating psychologically.
Yeah. I mean, you get a similar kind of pareidolia effects in the auditory domain, in my humble opinion, with respect to the electronic voice phenomenon. The idea that if you leave a recording device in a reputedly haunted location, you can actually record spirit voices. And there are lots and lots of websites you can go to, and you can play clips of these alleged spirit voices. And there are two possibilities. One is that they've inadvertently recorded living people they didn't realize were in the environment at the time. I remember doing a Good Morning or whatever it was, one of the daytime TV programs, and the paranormal investigator playing his EVP to me, and I had to admit, yes, it was someone singing Celine Dion songs, and it was terrifying. I just don't think it was a ghost, that's all. Other times it's probably not even a voice at all. It's kind of something that's a kind of random background noise with a bit of voice-like quality to it, and people are reading a meaning into it, often based on the context they know they're in. And again, you find if you go to these websites, a typical EVP sample will be very short, very poor quality. You can hear, you can't typically make out what the message is until someone tells you or you read it. And I kind of do whole talks doing examples of this, play it to the audience, and it's good fun, but and it illustrates the point. But yeah. Okay. I have got some notes here that you sent me earlier.
Okay. We're 50 minutes in. I don't know whether when do we take a break, and then do we do Q&A after that?
Yeah. Well, should we do? We'll do another 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then we'll take a 15-minute break. Yeah. So first off, is there any particular recent projects you'd care to mention, Richard, that have excited you?
Funny, it's so odd you say that. The chances. As people that are into my stuff will know, I've been working with Jordan Culver and Owen Watts and Rick Worth to produce Hocus Pocus. So I think most of our work, both you and I, is about getting skepticism out to the public. And so this is a kind of comic-based thing. They're fantastic illustrators and writers. And so this is it's not only for kids, it's for everyone. So it's a kind of skeptical comic. One of the things that annoys me is that often all the books and the TV shows and everything out there in the popular media is rarely from a skeptical perspective. Skepticism doesn't sell traditionally. So we produce Hocus Pocus. That's the first issue. The next issue coming out is all about ghosts, actually. It has Vic in it and Harry Price, who's just one of my huge heroes. I love anything to do with Harry Price. Perhaps we'll talk about him in Q&A. And this one, which is issue 1, is now extremely hard to find. I have a couple of them. And so I'm going to be giving out the best 2 questions we get. I'll send people a signed copy of that.
So it's in my notes here. Go grab a drink, /snack, /toilet. So go away, grab a toilet, and be back in 15 minutes, and we'll see you then. Thanks very much. Welcome back, everybody. I hear that the donations have been coming in, which is absolutely fantastic. I was told that it was already we'd passed our target. It was at 1,500, but we'd love to get more because it's a really, really good cause. So if you've not donated yet, please do. Just to remind you that if you want to donate, you go to sitp.online/charity. Okay. Now, we've got some questions coming in here. What we've decided we're going to do is each take turns in choosing a question that we like the look of and want someone to say. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Richard. The first choice. Which question would you like?
Well, thank you. I'm going to go with the question that says, how much is Hocus Pocus, the comic, and where can we get it from? I can't actually see that question in the list, but I'm assuming it's there. So it's $6.99 and it's online. But first of all, thank you to everyone who's contributed. Keep the contributions coming in. As Chris says, amazing charity and phenomenal that we've raised that amount already. So that's great. More seriously, my question is that I like. I once saw a man turn a tea towel into a chicken. Do you think this was a supernatural event? I do. I can find no rational explanation for either the event or why the man did it and continues to do it. But for those of you who haven't been to, I think it's QED. I may have done this at Skeptics in the pub. It's mainly QED that I've done it. Now I can't actually see myself on camera, so I'm hoping that you can see this tea towel. This is the very tea towel. You can during lockdown annoy everyone in your social bubble by telling that you can turn this into a chicken. And what you do is just, I hope you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just rolling up one side like that, and then you tuck this under your chin, or somebody else's chin, and roll up the other side like that. And then you have to explain to people that having a good imagination is a sign of high IQ, because boy, are they going to need that in a few moments' time. You then pull out each of these bits here, just pulling out each of the sort of four ends of the two rolls like that. That's it, got it, like that. And you then grab two of them, that's it. And the moment it looks much like a odd tea towel, but in a few seconds' time, this will be a chicken. You will not believe that you saw this, or indeed that a grown man showed it to you. So you pull like that, and lo and behold, I hope you can see it. You have a chicken there. So there we go. That's what I did. I did it at QED. I think it was QED. And that I was then I was forced never to do it again. No. I did it anyway. So thank you for I think it's I can't remember the name, FoyGL, who asked that very, very pertinent question. Over to you, Chris.
Well, my only thought there is that it's just such a pity that the James Randi Educational Foundation have discontinued the $1 million prize. You could be a very rich man, very rich man.
To Randy, I said to him, I think that's what may have actually forced them to close.
Yeah, they were going to lose money.
Yes, yeah.
Right. Okay. I'm going to choose Ellie's question here. Do you think that the pandemic will change reports of ghosts, increased anxiety, and inability to leave a spooky environment, etc.? I think, Ellie, you're absolutely right. And as it happens, I wrote a little article on this for the Skeptic magazine, which is now available free online. So do check it out. It's under new editorship. It's Mike Marshall and the Merseyside Skeptics, who's doing a great job. But it was that very question that I wanted to answer, because I'd been approached by a journalist who was writing an article on that very question. And being a good old skeptic, my immediate response is, well, is there any evidence that this is happening? Because the question was asked in terms of why is there an increase in these reports? And I said, well, is there? What's the evidence? Now, the actual evidence is not. There's some suggestive evidence, but it's not particularly compelling. But also, to follow up on that, it would not surprise me at all if that is the case, if there is an increase, for various reasons. One is that we do have pretty good evidence that during the pandemic, people's sleep patterns have been disrupted. So they're kind of awake more during the night than they may otherwise have been. There are obviously lots more people working at home, so they're spending more time in their house. They're noticing kind of creaks and noises that old houses in particular tend to make anyway, but usually you're not around to hear them or you just don't notice them. And one thing we talked about already, sleep paralysis. If you have the underlying predisposition to sleep paralysis, then disrupted sleep patterns will make it more likely to manifest. And also, a kind of final factor that's worth mentioning is just any kind of general increase in stress, anxiety, uncertainty about the future does tend to lead to an increase in magical thinking of all kinds. And that would certainly include kind of paranormal related beliefs and the anxieties that might come along with them. So, as I say, I can't say that there is any solid evidence I've seen as yet that shows that there is an increase in kind of reports of ghostly encounters during the pandemic compared to pre-lockdown times. But I would certainly expect that to be the case, and it'd be an interesting hypothesis to test properly. Over to you, Richard.
Very good, very good. I'm loving these questions. Keep them coming in. This is anonymous. What's the least bad ghost claim you've come across, i.e. hardest to explain, or one that's offered half decent evidence? So two things I think on that. Actually, it's similar to the one that's below that. Actually, was your favourite ghost story. When we did Hampton Court, nothing unexplained happened while we were there. But then we left, and the CCTV caught a very, very strange phenomenon, which is at one point some fire doors kind of flew open from Hampton Court, and there's somebody standing there in what looks like a long fur coat. It looks quite a historical kind of outfit. And those CCTV pictures went all around the world, and nobody said, "That's me." And it would be hard to fake something like that at Hampton Court because the CCTV is so extensive because of what's housed there. And it doesn't seem likely to me it's possible that the staff might mess around like that. Certainly the staff I met, that wouldn't be their kind of attitude at all because of where they're working. So it's a curious one. It's online. You see this kind of character throw open the doors. And it's not obvious to me. I thought that would be debunked quite quickly. Someone would say that was me, I was dressed like that, or whatever. Hasn't been. So very curious. In terms of my favourite ghost story, in terms of my favourite everything to do with the paranormal, it's always Harry Price, who was a ghost hunter in the 1930s. And Price was great. So he went and investigated a talking mongoose. He went to Germany with an ancient spell to try and change a goat into a handsome prince and so on. And I won't spoil the end of those two stories for you, but suffice to say, he was unsuccessful on both endeavour. But he also took over Borley Rectory, and he's a smart guy, Price. I mean, he was always got one eye on publicity. And so he was thinking, how do you generate ghost reports from this? So he basically recruited a team of about 40, 50 investigators and asked them to spend the night at Borley Rectory, for several nights actually, and record all the weird things that happened. And as Chris says, as soon as you put people into an alleged ghostly place and ask them to report their weird experiences, they'll have some very odd experiences. He put them all together in the locked book of Borley, and he went, there you go, England's most haunted house. And so it's a kind of a smart move because then he can go, it's nothing to do with me. There's all these independent investigators. Amazing. And he knew exactly what he was doing. He gave them each a blue book that told them where, how to report this stuff and what most people had experienced and so on. So he was a smart guy, and no one could really work out whether he was skeptical or not. But I just like Borley Rectory, I think, as a ghost story, and I love that investigation because it's canny. It's not skeptical. It's just very canny. Chris.
Okay. Here's one from Anonymous. Anonymous has sent in lots of questions this evening, actually. Is it possible to officially induce sleep paralysis in the lab? Would it be ethical? And then, in capital letters with an exclamation mark, do it. Well, actually, it has been done. Yes, there's some Japanese research. We touched on this briefly earlier, but sleep paralysis happens in the REM stage of sleep. During the normal sleep cycle, you go through kind of about 90-minute repetitious cycles during the night. And within each cycle, you go on a normal night's sleep, you go through stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, then you come back up again. Now, these are all on these different stages. your heart rate changes, your breathing, your EEG, and so on. And you go down, and then you come up again, and you go into what's called REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. And that is the phase of sleep during which vivid dreams are most likely to be reported. And during REM sleep, the muscles of the body are actually paralyzed, presumably to stop you acting out the actions of the dream. Something probably that goes wrong a little bit during night terrors. Well, actually, that doesn't happen during REM sleep, does it, as we said before? Anyway, so what you've got with sleep paralysis is you've got a situation where, to put it simply, your brain wakes up, but your body doesn't. And so you can see that you're in your bedroom, you often can open your eyes, you can't move, and you may have all this weird dream imagery coming through into normal waking consciousness. So how do you actually go about inducing it in the laboratory? Well, what these Japanese researchers did was to monitor psychophysiological activity, and every time people went into REM, they would wake them up again. And if you do this, if you deny people going into that REM phase, you get what's called a REM rebound effect. And what happens then is, rather than going through the earlier phases and then coming back up into REM, you go straight into REM as soon as you fall asleep. And that seems to be particularly associated with sleep paralysis. And so they could actually study it live in the lab, which is brilliant. You know, we know there weren't any demons. We know, it was a hallucinatory experience. The problem with the research is, of course, it's incredibly, some strange noises. Some strange noises. Wait, it must be ghost activity. The problem with those kind of studies is they're incredibly labor intensive, because even if you get people into the sleep laboratory who are susceptible to sleep paralysis, there is no guarantee that you'll be able to induce an episode on that particular night. So you may be there for a month, and maybe, if you're lucky, record 1 or 2 episodes. And of course, you've got people to staff it, you've got to have the equipment running. So very little of that research has been done, but there is some, and you can do it. You can induce sleep paralysis by that method. Over to you, Richard.
Very good. I don't know what your strange sounds were there, Chris.
Getting strange sounds. It's probably just in my head. I often get them. It's the voice.
Yes, this time of night, it happens to all of us. So what's this anonymous again? What's the story behind the hog and deer heads behind Richard? So I don't collect taxidermy. The pieces that are behind me, we're in the seance room, actually, by the way. So I've held many seances in this room. So many objects that are very odd here. This is our seance bell here, which, there we are, which was actually dug up in the garden of a haunted house, genuinely haunted house. So the pieces on there, first of all, are very, very old, very, very old. So I wouldn't have modern day taxidermy. But the history behind them is linked to ghosts, because I would think close to 20 years ago, I did a fake seance at a house in London. And then the person who'd asked me to do it phoned me up about a couple of days later and said, "I'm sorry, but we've essentially gone bankrupt. My entire family, for various reasons, have lost a vast amount of money. I don't quite know what it was. It was a dodgy deal or something. However, we feel terrible because you came and did this seance when I was working as a magician. So when you were here, you did point out the 2 goats and the hog that you really liked on the wall. So we're going to send them to you." So these are the fee for a seance about 20 years ago. They're very, very old pieces, as I say. But yeah, we have a lot of, you can probably see the door knocker as well over here, and say the seance bell here. So I'm surrounded by ghostly artifacts here. I don't know whether we're going to get any messages during this, but fingers crossed we do.
Did you have to pay tax on those? Send a horn in or something like that. I don't know.
I thought you were about to do a taxidermy. Is that how it works with taxidermy?
Or I would have done. Anyway, there's a question here. Do non-skeptic Ghostbusters in real life have special equipment like in the film? If yes, what instruments do they have, and what do they purport to detect? The answer is yes. I've kind of worked with various people who these are kind of people who are genuine, sincere believers trying their best to find objective evidence that there is spirit activity in the spirit world. So they come in with all kinds of kit. Now, and this will include things like, obviously, like night cameras, infrared cameras, motion detectors, electronic voice, EVP recorders, electronic voice phenomenon recorders, and 101 other bits of kit. And they spend all their money on buying this stuff. And again, if you watched any of the American programs that I'm not recommending, but if you want an insight into this, go and watch them. They do bring in all this kind of electronic equipment. And I think it's basically because they want to convince you that what they're doing is science. And it really, really isn't. I mean, half the time they're not even sure how the equipment works properly. I can remember on one occasion there was a claim that there was a ghost in a house in Leicester, and the Sun newspaper on its website had a video clip of a paranormal investigator holding a thermometer and communicating with the ghost, apparently, and getting him to lower the temperature. So you had this digital display, and as he was saying, please, can you lower the temperature by another degree? And the temperature was kind of fluctuating up and down, but the general trend was downwards. And within a minute or two, it had gone down by a number of degrees. And I ended up having to take part in an investigation with him for the TV. And by this time, I had been informed that he was not using his equipment properly. He thought it was measuring the kind of ambient general room temperature, but it wasn't. It measures the temperature of wherever you're pointing it. And so what was happening here is that as he was holding the device and tending to point it upwards towards the top of the wall, of course, heat rises, so the top of the wall will be a little bit hotter, but as your hand gets tired, it goes down lower, and the display was correspondingly going lower. So when we got together to do the investigation together, this was again for a TV thing, so it was all being filmed, and he repeated this demonstration. It worked in exactly the same way. And I just said, well, can I just borrow that for a second and have a look at it? And I kind of held it and pointed at the top of the wall. The temperature's quite relatively high. Point at the bottom of the wall, it's relatively low. And there you've got it. That's the explanation. Now, what the paranormal investigators will always say is, we don't conclude that it's a paranormal phenomenon until we've ruled out every other possible explanation. And in my experience, that is often not the case. Over to you, Richard.
Very good. Very good. Yes, I've seen lots of that equipment. It always just seems rather odd to me that you need all of that equipment to sort of see a ghost. I think that given that there's a huge literature that you can just see them, it just sort of seems to me that might be a more effective way. Which brings us to Anonymous again. When a believer confronts you with a case which you have no good explanation, how do you respond? Just say, don't know, that's fine, or something else. Very good question. And it gets into eyewitness testimony, which Chris and I might want to speak about. So here's the thing. From a sort of social psychological point of view, when people tell you their experience, what work are they doing? That would be my question. And so one of the things they're saying is, look, I've experienced this remarkable thing. Because of that, it makes me a rather special person. And therefore, if you attack that, you're attacking their sense of identity to some extent. And I think the possibility of them changing their mind when you've got your identity at stake is actually pretty slim. And so also what you're probably getting is a report that's been shaped over many retellings. Because the worst possible thing is that person has an experience they can't explain. They tell their friend, and their friend says, hold on a second, couldn't it just been rats under the floorboard? And so the next time they tell it, they'll get rid of that potential explanation. They'll say, we know, we checked and there were no rats there. And by the time it gets to you, they've got a story that has no explanation. And it doesn't mean that's what happened. It means that it's a narrative that's been shaped by social forces. And one of them is, my reputation is on the line here, and I don't want to look an idiot if you come up with an explanation. So to me, there's no point in challenging that. If I'm trying to be polite on some of the very rare occasions I'm trying to be polite, I will flip to, oh my goodness, how did that make you feel? Because normally the feelings, the emotions are quite genuine. And that's where you can have at least a genuine conversation, because otherwise it's going to get quite confrontational quite quickly. So I tend not to try and change people's minds in that instance. And I tend to flip to, oh my goodness, how did that make you feel? It does bring us on to a topic I know we want to talk about, Chris, which was eyewitness testimony.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, because we're both very well aware of the vast psychological literature on the unreliability of eyewitness testimony. And one of the kind of interesting twists in that, so there's literally thousands, probably tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of studies on that by now. But the very first systematic study of the unreliability of eyewitness testimony took place in the context of a faked seance back in the Victorian era. And this was a guy called S.J. Davy, who had been along to various seances and was initially convinced that it really all was supernatural, but then got wind of the fact that actually it was all being done by trickery. So he practiced the techniques himself, and he put on a seance, all the effects completely faked, just the way that Richard does it. But what was interesting was that he got everybody to write down an account afterwards in as much detail and as accurately as they could of what had taken place in the seance room. And the results were kind of fairly devastating, really, because they showed that people misremembered the sequence of events, misremembered what had happened, which objects had been touched, who was present at the time, what was going on, and so on, in such a way that if you accepted the account at face value, you may well have been stumped for a non-paranormal explanation. But unfortunately, the account given was not how it actually happened. I mean, again, and Richard's looked at similar effects in his work with the faked seances. We've both done work that looks at the kind of effects, the power of suggestion in those kind of contexts. So typically, again, following on from some of Richard's stuff, if the person playing the role of the medium says that a candlestick's moving, then afterwards you'll find that people who believe in the paranormal are more likely to report the candlestick moved, even in fact it didn't, and so on and so forth. So it can often be the case, and this is why the purely anecdotal evidence will probably never be enough just to convince me, no matter how sincerely given, no matter how honestly the person believes it, because we know that people make mistakes. We know that memory can be faulty. So it will always be the case. And that might put us into a bind. I mean, David Marks has recently been writing on this. I've not read the entire book yet, but he's actually arguing that paranormal phenomena will never be demonstrated in the lab, but maybe they really do occur in kind of real life spontaneous situations. If that is the case, then science will always have to remain silent on it, I guess. I don't know. What do you think, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit like the trickster theory, isn't it? That it's sized like a sort of trickster character, and that it will never be trapped in circumstances where it proves its own existence. And in fact, I noticed one of the questions was any researchers that have passed over to the dark side, and we're talking about David Marks. Not that David's done that, but that sort of idea of becoming more believerish. So two things to add about eyewitness testimony. One is that another early study was Tony Cornell from the Cambridge Ghost Society, Ghost Club. And Tony, who I knew very well, was a great person. He was a believer. And at one point, though, he did do an eyewitness testimony study where he ran around Cambridge dressed as a ghost, and not many people noticed him. And then he ran across, he went to a cinema and ran across where a trailer was on. He ran across the stage dressed as a ghost. And again, nobody noticed him. So it's a weird study. It's very early into what's called inattentional blindness, which is when we're focusing on one thing, we don't notice something else, even though subsequently it's quite obvious. And the magicians use that, and fake seance do. On the suggestion front, we use this actually quite a lot in the seance. So this is a bell here. And what we do is, if you just sort of even just make a suggestion to people that in their mind's eye, they're to imagine the bell ringing, and it's actually making a sound and moving at the same time. Some people, if you're highly suggestible, will actually experience that. There we go. So the quick sort of suggestibility test for folks there. Chris, do you have a question?
I do have a question, Richard. Are there any really interesting studies that you've come across quite recently about the relationship between inattentional blindness and paranormal belief? Because I sent a paper on that quite recently, and you've not read it yet.
It's not like I saw it come in. I actually deleted it. So yeah, no, I did read it. I read it. Yeah. It was by yourself and Anne. It's fascinating. Basically, it was looking at belief in the paranormal, intentional blindness, and working memory, and showed that paranormal believers tended to fall more for or attend less to obvious stimuli. So I thought it was an excellent paper. I thought it was one of your finest papers, and it only increased the respect I have for you.
And for Anne.
Yeah, I can't go any higher. That's a maximum.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, how that might relate is that, I mean, I'm sure both Richard and I get kind of sometimes people saying, well, let me tell you what happened to me. And then they will give you their paranormal story. And not always, but sometimes there may have been a very mundane explanation for what happened. You know, maybe there was someone in that room with them who moved the book. And I go, no. I'd have seen them. Well, you know, as Richard and I know, and as my wife Anne Richards, who does intentional blindness research, knows, often, you know, I mean, the classic demonstration of this is the gorilla experiment. I'll say nothing more if you haven't already come across it.
People do much, really, haven't you?
I probably already have in many ways. Yes, everybody knows that stuff now, Richard. You know, people don't notice things that you are sure would grab your attention, and you just don't see them, even when your eyes are looking directly at them. And as Richard says, into magicians and conjurers, they exploit these kinds of effects because they know that even if they're doing something directly where you're looking, if they can manipulate your attention properly, you won't take that information in, and you just won't register it. So, yeah.
I'm looking, and there's some great questions. I wonder if we should sort of whip through some of these quite quickly because some of them are so great. Anonymous again. Why are there never any ghost cows?
It
sounds like the beginning of a joke.
Most other species have been seen, but not cows, which is interesting.
Right, but it should be a good punchline. If anyone can think of a good punchline why there's no ghost cows.
I think it's something to do with how similar the word ghost and goat is. I mean, you know, there is a question: are you afraid? Not afraid of ghosts, but are you afraid of goats?
Right.
Personally, I'm terrified of them. Are paranormal tours something that we should be concerned about when thinking about skeptical activism? Are they harmless fun, or a gateway drug to woo? The very first time that I was contacted on this topic, oh God, this is really embarrassing now. Edinburgh Skeptics, who's the guy? I've got a mental block on the name.
Ash Price.
Yeah. Ash. Yeah. Ash Price contacted me. Sorry, Ash. This was before Edinburgh Skeptics had been set up, I think, if I recall correctly, and said that he was thinking of setting up some ghost tours, but for skeptics. And what did I think of the idea? And obviously, I loved the idea. I think it eventually transmogrified into Edinburgh Skeptics in the Pub, which are one of the most active and brilliant groups in the country. They put on the Skeptics on the Fringe every year, apart pandemic. Yeah, well, even this year I think they did something, didn't they, online? Yeah. But I think, you know, that was my small role in encouraging the formation of Edinburgh Skeptics in the Pub. But yeah, I mean, the standard ghost tours, again, it's an interesting one. I think that most people who go on those things probably are just doing it for a bit of fun and don't really believe in it. But some people do, and it's the same with astrology. Most people who read their horoscopes don't really believe in them, but some people do. It's the same with people who watch Most Haunted. A lot of people watch it just purely for a giggle, but some people think it's serious. And that's a difficult one because I don't want to kind of, you know, shut down things that people enjoy. On the other hand, there is that minority that take it all far too seriously. And I guess, I don't know whether, should we be concerned about that, Richard? What do you think?
No. I think...
No.
No. I think ghosts are psychological, as well as this relates to one of the other questions there. I think ghosts are psychologically interesting. It's interesting, it's been recorded across time in so many different cultures. I don't think it's, a burning issue of the day, because obviously there's quite a lot else going on in the world, and skepticism can contribute to. But I do think it's interesting. And also, in the same way as the person said, about ghost tours being the gateway drug into woo, I think ghosts for many people are a way of getting into skepticism, because it's kind of fun. We all love a good ghost story. It's kind of great. So question, it's not anonymous. I bet Richard was a fan of Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World. Please confirm. I was and remain a huge fan. And in fact, I was lucky enough to film, was it with Mysterious World? I think it was. We did a test of psychic detect, which was one of my favourite things, because I'm trying to think of the name of the skeptic now that set it up, and it's gone from my mind. I will think of it in a moment. It was where the police very kindly provided 4 objects that had been involved in murders. And the first 3 of them were the sorts of things you would expect. It was a bullet, and it was a scarf, and so on. And the psychic detective's job was to try and divine information about the murders. We got to the 4th object, and they pull back the cloth, and it's a stuffed Labrador. It's a full-size stuffed Labrador. And the TV people looked, and I looked, and apparently someone had been battered to death with a full-size stuffed Labrador. And they said, we just can't. It's all just too kind of weird. And it was the only time when I was filming with Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World where the producer said, yeah, it's just too weird, actually. But I did love the show. I think it's great. There's a question coming in there. I think it might have been from Steel Wolf.
I've got to interrupt you, sorry. Was this the study you did with Chris Robinson?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was. So the question you asked, by the way, was who was the skeptic who set the study up? Well, that was you.
Oh, that's right. And you. No, it wasn't.
The psychic was Chris Robinson, and one of the lines that sticks in my head. You apparently I don't even recall this. You appeared on an Esther show or something like that subsequently with Chris Robinson, No, Chris Robinson. That's right. Chris Robinson had been on saying, "I've been investigated by scientists at the University of Hertfordshire, and they don't know how I do it." And your comment in this talk was, "Now, what we said was we don't know why he does it," which amused me at the time. Anyway, yeah, sorry, carry on.
I helped run it, but it was set up by another skeptic who's written about ESP and is no longer with us, and I can't remember his name, unfortunately. I'm embarrassed to say. So there's a question there about James Randi, who unfortunately died earlier. It was last week, wasn't it? And about the $1 Million Challenge, and was that a useful way to go? I think it served its purpose, which was it was a kind of shorthand for saying, look, these claims fall apart when you investigate them, because Randy could say, look, the money's there, and it's never been claimed, which was just a very quick way of him getting to that point. So I think it was worthwhile, and in fact, Chris and I were involved in one of the challenges. I think one of the applicants. I think quite a few years ago.
Yeah, no, well, I did actually quite a few, because what the JREF basically was to say that before you went for the formal $1 million challenge, you had to pass a preliminary test carried out by somebody that Randy knew and trusted. So we ended up doing a few of those preliminary tests, and of course they never passed those, so Randy didn't have to do anything. One of the points out of that is that lots of people, lots of critics of Randy, kind of maintain that it was a fix. That there was no possibility of winning that money because the thing would be rigged. And I think both you and I know from having collaborated with him in setting up those tests that is just not true. He went to great lengths to make sure that the conditions were such that the claimant accepted it was a fair test. And you and I do the same thing, even if it's not a Randy challenge. We get the claimants to sign something in advance saying this is a fair test of my claim. And then always afterwards, when they fail the test, it's then that they decide it wasn't a fair test after all. And one other little rider on that, somebody earlier in the week was tweeting and asked if was there any kind of similar prizes available within the UK? And the answer to that is yes, there is. It's not $1 million, but there is a £10,000 prize available from the Association for Skeptical Inquiry, ASKE. Is there is it an acronym or an abbreviation? I can never remember. But anyway, if you go to their website, if you've got psychic powers and you can prove it under controlled conditions, £10,000 awaits you. And I would only ask for 10% as an introduction fee for telling you about it.
Perfect.
I'm not, Richard. I'm not a greedy man.
Randy was very interesting. I knew him fairly well, and we worked together a little bit. And I think my best memory, and I wrote about this for Skeptic with Randy. Randy's a very well-respected magician. He really knew magic. He'd been involved in it pretty much all of his life. And so I went along to the premiere of An Honest Liar, which is a documentary obviously about him, and I was involved in it. And we walk in, and there's two things. First of all, Alice Cooper, the documentary about Alice Cooper was also being shown at the same film festival. So in the green room was, funnily enough, all the skeptics and all the people involved in Alice Cooper's documentary. It wasn't hard to glance at the crowd and work out which were which. But the weird thing is that Randy, of course, had cut off Alice Cooper's head on a nightly basis when he toured with him. And so all the Alice Cooper people knew Randy. And there's this bizarre thing of all these people that spent their life in rock and roll going, Randy, oh my goodness. And so anyway, to walk in, and he goes over to the table, drinks table, and I notice he prepares for a trick. He does something, which means he's prepared to perform this trick. And I spotted him do it. So I think, okay, he's going to do the trick in 20 minutes or whatever. 2 hours goes by, and he's still got this preparation on him. I know he has. And he hasn't done it. And what he was waiting for is someone to say, oh, Mr. Randy, can you show us a trick? And this woman said, can you show us a trick? And he went, oh, no, I don't want to take. Oh, go on. No. Oh, go on. All right, then. And then he does this amazing trick that's been set up for 2 hours in advance. And it blows everyone away because the only explanation is, well, you either sat there for 2 hours waiting to do that, which is crazy, or there's no explanation. So he really knew magic. And not skeptics don't realize how kind of embedded he was in the magic community.
Yeah. I remember doing a weekend course at the Davenport's, the magic shop near and Anne was quite into all this stuff, so we did a weekend course and kind of little back room there with some fantastic magicians. I mean, one of them kind of went on the Penn and Teller Fool Us thing and fooled them, so really high quality stuff. But because I'd heard this stuff again from the critics saying he's not even really a very good magician, and I didn't think it was true, but I didn't know. But sure enough, the posters they had in the wall in that room, one of them was Randy. So this is a man internationally respected as a magician.
Oh,
so
no, I had many conversations with him, always quietly in the wings. The wings are such special places, and they're wings are very interesting because they're kind of spaces of transition. So you have the craziness that's happening out on stage, very well lit, and you have normality, and then you have the wings, and that's where most experienced performers are quite quiet, and that's when you can have these little sort of chats, and that's where my memories mainly of Randy are there, just having these quiet chats about stuff, just waiting to go on. Because he wasn't on, often he was just expected to be performing all the kind of time. And he was at his most interesting when he was off stage, actually, just quietly chatting to you about life. Sorry, I've got off.
Question here. No, we're going off on one, aren't we? How do ghost encounters, this is Anonymous again. Anonymous is brilliant. Fantastic questions. Amazing. How do ghost encounters differ in, say, China versus USA, Nigeria versus India? Does each culture have a generic ghost concept and everyone sees that? And the short answer to that is it is really interesting if you look at this as a kind of, a cross-cultural phenomenon. So you look at different countries, you look at different eras in history, you'll find that virtually every society does have beliefs about ghosts or spirits, but the details will differ. And so the kind of ancient Greek notion of what a ghost was is quite different from our modern notion of what a ghost is. And similarly for lots of other comparisons. And the kind of message from that is that we're dealing with a cultural phenomenon. You know what? If there is an objective afterlife, if ghosts are real, then presumably they're a manifestation of some eternal afterlife, which one assumes would probably be unchanging and therefore would all see the same thing, regardless of time and place. And we don't. We see what, in general terms, we tend to see what the particular expectations of our particular culture would lead us to expect, to experience. I mean, there's a lot of individual variation within that, as we've already talked about. Typically people don't see full form apparitions. They get a sense of presence and so on and so forth. But our general concepts differ from culture to culture. So we're dealing with a cultural phenomenon rather than something that's got any objective reality, I think.
Chris, have you seen The Haunting of Bly Manor on Netflix?
No, not yet, but I will.
It's great. It's very, and I'm rather enjoying it. It's very good at that's got uncanny sort of experiences that put a little shiver down your spine. So if other folks have seen it, put some comments or questions or something. But no, I'm enjoying it.
I shall check that out. Right, have you got one there, Richard?
Sorry?
I say, have you got another good question there?
Hassan Selim is asking, where is the Quirkology goat? And this is a quite obscure reference, but I love it, to the Quirkology YouTube channel I did for many years. And one of the two behind me, I don't know which one it is, because I don't turn around because it'll reveal my bald spot, is, Chris, why have you not lost your hair? I've known you, and you've had that amount of hair all the time. I lost my hair when I was like 7.
This is the one thing I've got over you, Richard. You're more successful than me. You're funnier than me. You're more creative than me. I've got more hair.
So one of these two is the Quirkology goat. And if people don't know what that is, basically I was filming the Quirkology stuff and we hadn't quite got enough footage. And I said, let's just film one of the goats and call it the Quirkology goat. So we filmed one of them and it became this thing that people then put on T-shirts and all sorts of things. So that is one of them. So thank you for that question. So what else have we got here? Steel Wolf, good one here. What do you think the documentary movies known as Ghostbusters? Are you calling Bill, we're shot off on screen there, Bill Murray a liar? Are you a fan of Ghostbusters, Chris?
Yeah, I am. Yeah. I don't know about you. Well, the very first radio interview I ever did, which was back in the day, it'd be in the 80s, and it was Radio Leicester. And what music did they use to introduce me to come on? Ghostbusters. Yes. And earlier this evening, one of my daughters had decided we would have a Halloween quiz. And one round was all kind of Halloween-related music, and I didn't recognise the introduction. So, yeah, but I do like the film. No, I do like it. And I've never seen the remake. I don't know. I mean, people didn't really like that, did they? But I've not seen it. Are you a fan?
Yeah, remake. I love the film, though. I love it. I think it's fantastic. A lovely kind of quality to it. And I don't know whether that did kick off the whole idea of going into haunted places with equipment. I'm not quite certain where that kind of movement comes from. I mean, people have always been using like Price and so on, have used like thermometers in seances and so on. But the idea of kind of, local teams going on, I think it might trace back to that film in the way a lot of alien abduction experiences trace back to Close Encounters and so on.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think you often can see these kind of increases in activity. What typically happens, and I'm not teaching my grandmother to suck eggs here, but what typically happens is these beliefs will kind of bubble along, a sizable minority level at least, and then there'll be some big film that will increase interest for a while, and then it'll go back to where it was, And some of the kind of things that resurface, like belief in angels, as it's now kind of multi-billion-dollar industry, where you'd have thought, really, Well, I wonder what will be next. There might be another thing that comes along and surprises us. But there was a question there, and I can't find it now. Basically asking do people, are self-reported alien encounters similar to self-reported ghost encounters made in the pre-sci-fi age? I certainly think, again, we've talked about this a lot, and I don't want to say too much more about it, but sleep paralysis is a common factor in both of them. There is a difference, however, at least in my view, that with respect to kind of a lot of ghost claims, they describe the actual sleep paralysis encounter itself in terms of what they saw, what was happening, what they thought was going on. You tend to find with the alien abduction claims that there's a kind of two-stage process. It's not that the original experience involves aliens. The original experience involves waking up, feeling a sense of presence, not being able to move, maybe weird lights moving around the room, humming sounds, blah, 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 blah. It's then in the UFO literature, it says, if you've had one of those experiences, you've probably been abducted by aliens. They've wiped your memory for the rest of the experience. So now the challenge is recover that memory. And so you go off a hypnotic regression, and that's where the detailed story of being abducted by aliens comes in. I've actually done kind of, like radio interviews where they've had me on and an abductee, and the abductee, they've asked about the experience, and they've described a classic sleep paralysis experience. And I said, well, where were the aliens? Oh, well, I don't remember the aliens, because obviously they wiped my memory, but they're convinced they have been abducted by aliens, and it wasn't. It was classic sleep paralysis.
There's pesky aliens.
Yep.
I see here one.
Go on.
Anonymous.
One more question, I think.
Okay. What's the best way to hone critical thinking? Could you recommend any books, areas of study, or activities? Well, one thing I could recommend is Hocus Pocus, the magazine, which is just out. Thank you, Anonymous, for that one. But there's some great books out there. Obviously, my own Paranormality. But actually, you mentioned David Marks and Psychology of the Psychic. I haven't read his new book, but Psychology of the Psychic, my goodness, what a great book that is. Randy's Flim Flam, I would go with, obviously, going back a few years, but is great. Chris, what else would you recommend from the skeptical literature?
Yeah, most of the more recent stuff. David Robert Grimes's The Irrational Ape is a really, really good book. So I hope you'll buy me a drink next time I see him. What else have we had recently? There's a fantastic book going to be coming out in a year or two called The Science of Weird Shit. What a fantastic title. Yes, that'll be mine. Okay, so put that on your reading list. I'm trying to think.
What about the conspiracy theory one that your student did?
What was that?
Conspiracy theory?
Yeah, Brotherton's book, The Suspicious Minds. That is an excellent book. And again, we're going off ghosts a bit now, but I was asked recently in an interview what I think are the kind of most important areas for skeptics and skepticism going forward. And I would say probably the psychology of belief in conspiracy is one of those areas, because it's become conspiracy theories have become so much part of the mainstream now for obvious reasons, and we really need to find ways to kind of counter that misinformation. It's a very, very dangerous time. Hopefully, very soon we might have some good news on that front, but let's not get too political. Anyway, Richard, do you have any kind of final thoughts for our viewers to take away with them?
First of all, thank you for watching. Second, thank you for donating. That's absolutely brilliant. There's an astonishing amount of money. Please keep those donations coming in. Third, in terms of my two comics, there's issue one here, quite rare. I'm going to send one to Steel Wolf because that very kindly. Oh my goodness, turn that off. Very kindly posted so many questions, and the other one, the question's gone now, but whoever asked about the Quirkology goat, I can't find your name, so I think it's been taken off here. But whoever asked about the Psychology Go, you'll get the second comic. So if both of you can just email the Skeptics, which is skeptics.online@gmail.com, email them. I'll get your address. I'll send you a signed comic. And also thank you, first of all, for the Skeptics setting this up, astonishing. And for you, Chris, lovely to see you. Thank you very much for taking the time. And next time I see you, it'll be face-to-face, and I'll give you a big hug.
Oh, lovely. I can't wait. So just a few words from me to finish with then. Again, thanks to everybody for watching and particularly for donating if you did. The fundraiser is still open, so please carry on donating. That's sitp.online/charity. Reminder of the next speaker in this series, it's the one and only Tim Harford. I'm a huge fan, from Radio 4's More or Less, talking about how to make the world add up, the 10 rules for thinking differently about numbers. That's this Thursday, 5th of November. And for those of you that want to carry on and have a little bit of socializing with your friends, the Lock-ins Razor virtual Zoom pub will be open shortly. The link for that is in Twitch chat, or visit sitp.online/virtual pub. But just to finish the evening, thank you so much for your time, Richard. Entertaining and informative as ever, and I hope to see you soon. Take care.
Okay, see you soon. Bye-bye.